excited. I love how the front row's got a few extra spots. You got family members coming? My name is Angie Morthland. I am honored to be the Mackinaw Area Historical Society president, grunt worker, whatever else we want to call it, boss, you tell me all the time. We have amazing family stories today that we're going to hear from Dennis and cousin Tom. And are you going to add some? No wife part of this. Okay. So what I'd love to do is you guys give a round of applause and greet our most amazing ancestral people we have as docents. I would say the relatives of the Stimpson family. Dennis Micus.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. People, thanks to the Historical Society for letting us share our family history. And I'd also like to thank the library for providing this place where we meet once a month. The subject of tonight's talk
You're not going to use the mic, you're going to have to be a little louder, young man.
Oh, really?
Sorry, boss. Just be a little louder.
All right. The subject of tonight's talk, is that good?
Yeah.
The subject of tonight's talk is a short history of the Stimpson family, but not the entire Stimpson family. That would take too long. We're going to concentrate on the oldest son of George and Elvira Pillsbury Stimpson, Charles Stimpson, and his descendants. And the reason we're doing that is because they were the ones that lived at the Maple Ridge Farm, which we have the replica of out at the Heritage Village. So if we could show, okay, there's George and Elvira. When they came here after, first they went to Sheboygan, and then they, for a year, but they came from Maine, and they relocated in 1869. George got connected with Edgar Conkling, who was the founder of present-day Mackinaw City. And he hired him to look after his interests, build the dock at the end of Central Avenue, where Central Avenue is now. He logged, I think Conkling had about 6,000 acres, and he helped log some of that off and sold the steamers cordwood when they'd come in. Actually, they lived a year in Sheboygan, then they moved to Mackinaw, and with the steamer traffic coming in to get the cordwood, people would get off the boats, come to the house, and they turned that into Mackinaw City's first hotel. So, but just as a side note, George died when he was like 58 or 59 years old, somewhere in that late 50s, of pneumonia. So that stopped the progress there. The Stimpson house was built. Now when I say Stimpson house, I mean that hotel in town. And his oldest boy, Charles, married, let's go to Maple Ridge Farm. Okay, so this is the house and the farm that's out on Stimpson Road that is currently owned by the Greeby family, but this is how it looked back in the day. This kind of shows a picture of the buildings and the house. I don't know how they must have climbed up a tree to take that. That's Charles. Charles was the oldest son, and he had, Maple Ridge Farm was a very good farm for that time. I mean, he prospered. You can see it with the buildings. You can see it with the house that he built, which was built around 1882. And when you compare it with other farms, like in our village, we have the Detweiler house to compare it to. Charles knew how to run a farm. He used new techniques. He had sheep, goats. He actually had Angora goats because they helped browse down the understory of the woods to keep the woods from creeping back into the pastures. He had a Delco electrical plant in the back of the farmhouse that he would fire up and he would charge the electricity, the batteries that he would take out to the barn. The house didn't have electrical power, but the barn did. So, because that's where he made his living. He even, he fished in early days. But the other thing, when you get to the 1920s, and Charles is still alive. He didn't die till 1929, but he sold the rocks from his fields because the land out there is stony, sandy, short growing season. He sold the rocks for the state dock. We have that in our our family albums. So he was a pretty progressive farmer, and him and Ella, who he met as a young lady, she was a school teacher. Her family were homesteaders out in Bliss, Michigan. And then, of course, when they married, she gave up teaching school. So the rest of the Maple Ridge farm, Charles died in the 20s, late 20s. His wife died 10 years previous to him, and he would he assisted my grandma in running the farm. His daughter, Ruth, and the farm started to go downhill. So in the 40s, the family moved into Mackinaw City, and they sold the farm to the Greaves. And then, to kind of, I don't want to go too far in this, but then the original farmhouse burnt down in around 1966 of an electrical fire when the Greavy family owned it. So we had the family had moved into Mackinaw, so we had the photo albums, and we were able to recreate the original farmhouse out at the Heritage Village. And I'd really love to invite you guys all out there and walk you through it, because thanks to my cousin, all those artifacts most of those artifacts came from him and other family members, but he has the lion's share of them. So we wouldn't have been able to recreate it as close as we did without Tom's donation. So next we're gonna talk about Charles and Ella. I kind of already did go through them, but that's Charles on the plow with the two horses. He also used oxen on the farm. Ella came originally from Wisconsin, and her family all left Bliss, but that's where she started. That picture there shows Charles in the background, Ella in the chair, Grandma, and the other one I think is Aunt Ida. But this is where we're going. Charles and Ella, and they had two children, Ruth and Clarence. And they were both born on the farm. In fact, both Clarence and Ruth inherited the farm after Grandpa died. And we'll talk about Clarence next, because he's kind of an interesting person. Yeah, I want to talk about Clarence next. So Clarence Amos Stimpson, he was the oldest son. Sorry, I'm trying to talk in normal voice, but oldest son. He was born in 1884. He he graduated from Mackinaw City High School, and you can see his valedictorian speech in the back of the schoolhouse out at the Heritage Village. It's up there in the back. Then he went to MAC, Michigan Agricultural College, now Michigan State, as a civil engineer, okay? So then, do we have that other picture? Let's switch, hit the other one. Okay, this is the fun thing before I go into his wartime duty, while he was at MAC, and Tom and I found this extremely interesting, right, Tom?
Yeah.
We found photos. He both played on the football team at MAC, and he was a wrestler for MAC. well, Tom and I were both high school wrestlers. And so that was really a great thing to see and find out about the family. You can see the years 1905. Well, after college, a few years after, he worked as a civil engineer, and then the war broke out. He went to France. Not too long after he went to France, he was injured. He was wounded and lost an arm in World War I. I don't know what battle it was, but he was brought home to Walter Reed Hospital. My grandma and her mother, they went out to see him. We have pictures of those in the album. But then, as he recovered, he wasn't discharged. He served the remainder of his time in D.C. And they gave him non-combat duties, of course, but he stayed in the Army. Then he later became a civil engineer. He married Ollie Lee Dobson in the 30s. They had no children, and he ended up living the rest of his life in South Carolina. But he did live part of his years in Ann Arbor also. So that's Clarence. Now his sister Ruth. His sister Ruth also graduated from Mackinaw City High School. There's the piano, Angie, that we're looking for. She got that piano on her 16th birthday, and that was in the parlor of the original house. That's the only piano we want in the parlor. If we can't find that, we don't want any, right, Tom? So there's her graduation. There's 4 generations right there. The back one is Elvira, Clarence, Ruth, and the oldest of her children, Forrest. So she married Bert Barrett in 1914, and they raised all 7 children, at least most of the children, most of their high school years, on the farm, on Maple Ridge Farm. See where I'm going here? This is all about Maple Ridge. This is all about the recreated farmhouse out at the village. And this, now when I'm going to get to here about the 7 children, they were all raised there, and these were my mother and my aunts and uncles. And I have a personal knowledge. I remember hearing stories of growing up on the farm. Tom does too, and we love to share these stories with you. Things about like sledding down the hill to go to school, and getting going out in the woods and cutting the Christmas tree, and then lighting it with candles, and then blowing it out immediately because they were worried about a fire. And because Grandpa lived with them till my mom was about 10 years old, her and Aunt Kay would sit next to him on Christmas Eve dinner, and him being a New Englander, he was born in Maine, remember, they would always have oyster stew on Christmas Eve. Well, little kids couldn't stand oyster stew, but they liked the milk broth and the oyster crackers. So they'd each sit each on one side of Grandpa, and they put the oysters in his bowl. And he just loved that. And he'd always have imported oysters for Christmas Eve, and that became a tradition at our house. Until recently, my mom always made oyster stew. So there's like some of the New England part of the family. So the stories were very interesting, and it was a rural life. But again, going back to the prosperous part of the farm, better take that back, E, if you can. The farm, the Maple Ridge. So in the 1800s, early turn of the century, he had 2 children. He sent both of them to college. Clarence graduated from MAC. Ruth went to MAC, but she had to come home when her mother got ill. Okay, that's so I've got to talk about Grandpa, Bert Barrett. He came from Illinois because he had bad hay fever. He was a barber in town. He was the barber. His shop was located next to the Keyhole Bar. I don't know exactly how he met my grandmother, but he was never a farmer. He went into town and did his work in town. He had no part of the farm. So after Grandpa died, she got no help from her husband as far as I've ever heard, you know. He did his thing in town, and a lot of times if storm, because it was about 3 miles outside the farm in the early days, storms come, he would stay at the barber shop. And we don't have a barbershop picture. Oh yeah, there he is. So again, there's him and Grandma as young, almost newlyweds, I want to say, and there he is in his barber shop, which was located next to the Keyhole. And after he got done barbering about 1962, and I got a picture that I gave Roy. He was barbering, or he was the night clerk at the Statler Hotel, which was the old Stimpson house. So in his 80s, he was working. You know, he still kept working, and then he got sick about 1967. Anyway, that is Ruth and Bert, and we'll go to their next. There's 7 kids next, but the next thing I want to say is I want to talk about the family's military service, because it's important, and I think it's sometimes neglected. So, we're going to go back to George. He sold horses to the Union Army in the Civil War, and he took his oldest son, Charles, with him. We have a quartermaster's pass preserved that tells us about that, or that shows that. And then his son, Clarence, served in World War I, lost an arm. Okay, now you go to the 7 children. Forrest was a 20-year veteran of the Army Air Corps. He was at Hickam Field when they bombed Pearl Harbor. He also was in Korea. He served 20 years, and he reached the rank of Master Sergeant. I'll say more about that later. Charlie, the next one, had no service, but he was a dairy farmer, a lifelong dairy farmer. They wouldn't, as I heard it, they wouldn't take dairy farmers, or, you know, he needed to produce milk for the country during World War II. Jack spent 4 years in World War II in the Army. He was a heavy gunner, served in New Guinea. Mary married a Naval Reserve man. Kay married a Navy guy who worked his whole career for the federal government in the Point Mugu out in California. Warren was in the Army, and he served in the German. He was in the Army for 4 years, and was in Germany when they occupied Germany after World War II. And Bill was in the Army. He was drafted, and he spent a year and a half in the Army. He said it was the worst years of his life, or the worst year and a half of his life. It was after the Korean conflict, but he did not like that at all. And the Barretts, all my uncles, as well as I knew them, Tom too, his father, they never talked about their military service. You'd ask, you know, when you were a kid, you'd say, what did you do, you know, in the Army? Or what did you do in the service? Or tell me some war stuff. No, they didn't do that. The only time I ever heard my uncles talk was Forrest and Jack would get together on every New Year's Eve. And once in a while, or one time I can remember them kind of over drinks, just reminiscing a little bit about it, but not bragging, not kind of, I don't know, comparing. And I think they suffered a lot through it. And I think that might have been, they spent a lot of time at the American Legion in Mackinaw City. But that's all I want to say about that. But they did their duty for their countries, or their country. And so, Forrest, the oldest, 1 year after he graduated from Mackinaw City, 1 year at MAC or MSU as a forestry guy, and then he came back to Mackinaw, and he didn't like the farm either, so he came back and was really unhappy. And now this I can't verify, only stories on my grandmother's front porch went like this. He was so unhappy at the farm that he heard the train coming out of Mackinaw City, and he was milking cows, and he dropped the milk pails right where they were, and he ran down Stimpson Road, down the hill, and he caught a train, and he hoboed, and he just took off. He didn't tell anybody he was going, he just took off, and they didn't hear from him for, I don't know how long. We can't find that out, but I do know that at one time, he was in Detroit, and he ran into an old classmate. I don't know if any of you guys remember Ford Martin. He was a former male in Mackinaw City, and he was his classmate. Well, he just happened to run into Forrest at, or Sarge as we call him. He happened to run into him, and he took him right to a phone booth to call his mother, because his mother thought he was dead. Hadn't heard from him in a couple of years, a couple of months, I don't know, but it just vanished. So he entered the service around 1940. He served till 1960. I told you that he was at Hickam Field when they bombed Pearl Harbor. Another story is when he was in the service, he kept sending home packages to my grandma. By that time, they lived in Mackinaw City. All of a sudden, the military police showed up at the door. He was shipping back gold from overseas. It was illegal to own gold, and he was shipping it back. How he didn't get, he got in big trouble according to him and my family. How they didn't throw him out of the service, I don't know. How he maintained his rank, I don't know, but he did maintain his rank. He retired because Tom and I researched this, and the Sheboygan County VA really helped us a lot on getting years of service and discharge places and all that. So hands up to them. They really did a good job when we were researching this stuff. He did bring other things home from Korea. He brought his wife. Her name, we called her Aunt Mary, but her name was Nam Ye. She was a wonderful lady. They didn't have any children, okay? So they lived together in Rogers City at the end. After retirement, he did various jobs, like he rode in the back of a mail truck and sorted mail going up 75. He started a rock shop in Mackinaw City. That didn't work out, but when he moved to Rogers City, he went on the freighters out of Rogers City, out of the calcite fleet, and was a second cook, right?
Yes.
And you should hear the guys tell stories about him in the kitchen. He had a temper. He had a quick temper, but he was a great guy. Okay, that's Forrest. The next one we're going to do is Charles, or Charlie, or Charles Olin. He was the second child. He graduated from Mackinaw City High School also. He played sports at Mackinaw City, at least basketball, I know, because we have a picture of him in a sweater. He married Maud Brooks, who came from a farm in Monroe Township. That's Aunt Maud in the corner over there. That's him with his younger brothers. There he is with his M sweater, Mackinaw sweater in the middle. There he is with his dairy calf. He had 3 different farms. He started working Maple Ridge with my grandma. Something happened because grandma claimed that he had the opportunity to take it over. He said it was never offered to him. So he moved on to a farm where Dingman Marsh is now. You guys know where Dingman's is. It's flooded. His land was condemned, and he had to move it off. So he went to his farm, which his brother, my cousin Forrest, owns now on Extension Road in Monroe Township, and he named it Hungry Hills. Now, if you know Charlie, you know he had a lot of bad luck in his life. So here's some of his misfortunes. I learned about another one today, but first, he lost the farm at Dingman Marsh. Second, he was in a severe, he was running a team of horses and he had a severe back injury. In fact, he had to go to Ann Arbor for the surgery, and it was like an experimental thing. He always wore a back brace the rest of his life. Okay, then when he gets to Hungry Hills, his house burns down. They rebuilt his house. The neighbors they built a small house for him. For a while, he lived in like a kind of a railroad car thing. I got a picture of it. You know, until they rebuilt the house. He lost his barn for his dairy cattle to a tornado, one of the few tornadoes that ever hit Sheboygan County. It gets worse. So then they build the bridge in the 50s, right? Prior to that, they start coming through. They're going to put I-75 up, right? They cut his pasture right in half. They condemned his land. He could not. He couldn't. You know, they wouldn't build him a bridge to bring his herd back and forth. So that's when he sold the dairy cattle. But he still maintained the property on both sides, and then he started working for the neighbors. Well, when he's working for a neighbor, he gets in a farming accident and he loses an arm. And it goes on and on. So he lost an arm working for a guy, and people would say to him, well, did you get any kind of settlement from that? He says, you know, you didn't know Uncle Charlie, but he would shake his head. He says, that guy who I worked for, I lost his arm, he says, I would never think of suing him. He was better to me than my own brothers, you know, and that's how he was. He was so then when he moved to Mackinaw City for a winter off the farm, he never wanted to leave that farm. But he moved in because Grandma needed him. Grandma had lost Grandpa, and she couldn't stay there by herself. Her arthritis was so bad. So he got a job working where they were building the UAW site in Black Lake. And he got a job running the tool crib. The one-armed guy could do that. And he went every day to work with Ed Yoder. I don't know if any of you guys knew Ed Yoder. I'm sure you did. But they were coming out of Kmart, and he slipped on the ice and he broke his hip. Oh. And Kay told me that he was struck by lightning 3 times. I never heard that story till tonight. I can't believe it.
He was my uncle too.
She's on one side. But let me tell you something. You think Charlie had a rough life? Charlie and Maud had a wonderful life. They loved each other. You went to their house. The first thing he'd say to you, he'd see us pull up the drive, and the first thing he'd say was, "What are you doing here?" Well, once you got in, it was like he couldn't, you know. And Maud was making you side pork, and you were eating out of their garden. He had a beautiful vegetable garden. He had beautiful flowers. He wouldn't buy store-bought chicken. He had chickens.
Yeah.
He even had a pet pony that we'd go out and see when we were kids. Yeah. And he also he took care of 2 of Warren's children, Tom and Forrest, when they were young kids after their mother died. They gave up their bedroom. They only had a 1-bedroom farmhouse, and they slept on the couch for 4 years while you guys were growing. And so they had a wonderful life. He would say to me, he'd say, if I had enough money at the end of the year to go in and buy my flour and my sugar, because he bought flour by 50. I mean, they cooked everything from scratch. They cut their own wood, and the neighbors would always be there. So don't feel bad about Charlie. Charlie had a great life. He loved his life. that's Charlie. The next one is Jack. Uncle Jack, John Clarence, he never graduated from Mackinaw City. He dropped out of school. And he got bit by the automotive bug. After he left Mackinaw, he went down to Pontiac and he worked his career at Pontiac Motors. And then he went into the Army, served 4 years. I think he had a pretty rough hitch in the Army, active combat. So, and he contacted malaria. The only reason I bring up this, when he was in New Guinea, he contacted malaria, and he used that for the rest of the life to get off work during November so he could go up to Darrow's deer camp. I'm telling you, there was no man, I can maybe think of one other man who loved deer hunting more than my Uncle Jack, and he loved Darrow's hunting camp, and he went there every year, and he would get a doctor's okay to get a couple of years, a couple of weeks off, and I mean, he didn't go for the weekend. They went up before the season opened, and they stayed the whole season, and sometimes longer if they got iced in. But I wish I got a couple of great pictures of him and Sarge and his father Warren. They went to Darrow's camp, and getting back to the farming, so he wasn't a farmer in the way Charlie was, but he always wanted to be, because he worked in Pontiac, and then when he married my Aunt Ruth, or Eleanor, later on in his life, she came from a farming background, and they grew fruits and vegetables like strawberries, raspberries. He made cider in the fall, pumpkins, sweet corn, and there was always this competition between Charlie and Jack about who grew the best vegetables. And there was no small rivalry between those two, but they worked it out. So Jack was he was the guy who took me hunting the first time, and I still have his rifle. It was willed to me, and had a lot of good times, because I would go up to his place in Emily City when I was a youngster and help them harvest their strawberries and then their raspberries, and then Aunt Ruth always got me side jobs, haying and all that. So I lived at their place quite a bit in the summertime. Okay, the next one, how am I doing on time?
You're good.
Yeah. I'm good? Okay. The next one is Mary Elizabeth. She graduated from high school, Mackinaw City. In case you haven't figured that out, that was my mother. She's the fourth. First girl of the family. She always called herself Daddy's girl. I think she was closest to my grandpa. But probably Kay would dispute that. Anyway, she was the only one of the Barretts that was not born at the house. She was born in Petoskey in the hospital. That was during the Spanish flu. And I never really heard, but I always, birth certificate, she was born at Northern Michigan Hospitals. And she actually was kind of sickly when she was young, so she started school a year late. She graduated in '39. She was a Mackinaw City cheerleader along with her sisters. My uncle used to do cheer. I think Tom and I could do it, but I think you'd have to pay us.
A lot.
So, but she was raised on the farm, till she graduated. They lived on the farm, and she always spoke. Now these are Depression children, and so we'd ask about the Depression, as you're growing up, and she says, "We really never had it bad during the Depression. There was always food to eat. We didn't have much money, but we never had much money. The farm was probably starting to go down. It wasn't being worked as well as when Charles was still alive, and the boys had gone. And I think Grandma had some high of her experience in the farm. They would have hay fields down by the lake. At the end of Stimpson Road, there were hay fields. And she says, we'd do a good day's work if we got 2 loads of hay up into the barn in the summertime. She said, all summer, we were barefoot. We ran on barefoot, and then in the fall, we got new shoes for school. I remember her telling me that. But she always loved her time on the farm. She talked about sweet corn, or corn, eating corn, and how much corn her brothers could consume. But they said, we didn't eat sweet corn. We ate tender field corn. And they had a big orchard, there was a big orchard there, so they had apples and stuff. And so anyway, after she left the farm, she went to Clary Business College, which was in Kalamazoo, to be a secretary, bookkeeper, that kind of stuff. She ended up working for the State Highway Department for a time. She worked at doctor's offices for a time. She jumped around, but mostly stayed in Michigan. She met my father on a blind date, and they had 2 children. They didn't last together. They divorced. She kind of was unlucky at love. I'll just leave it at that. But she was a great mother. And she always, she did everything for her children. She took care of a lot of elderly people. Like when we were living in Clawson, she was always making something. And she says, I got to take something to Grandma Leak. I got to take something to Edith Champion. She was like that. And so was her sister Kay. And when my grandpa got sick in '67 and was in the hospital, she rushed right up here because there was nobody to go see him. Grandma couldn't drive. There was Bert.
Yeah,
he was gone. My Uncle Bill was gone. Jack was working. Forrest was gone. So she came up and she drove every day in an old Studebaker to Petoskey. Every day to take, at that time he spent a month in the hospital. And then they brought him home. I can remember that year they brought him home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and he still wasn't well. But she was there for him. That was the kind of person she was. And she even retired. She left Clawson and retired in Rogers City when Bill got sick with this heart problem. Her youngest brother got sick, and because she wanted to help take care of Bill. So anyway, and she actually took care of her mother in her older years. We moved Grandma down to our house for a year when she could no longer, and all the Barretts did that. They all took their turns taking care of their mother. It's normal in families, right? But this is just our family. I know for sure what happened in our family. Next one is Kathleen. Kathleen was the aunt from California. But she grew up on the farm. She graduated a year after my mom. She married a swell guy named Wendell Slowey, and they had very happy years. Again, no children. You're seeing a lack of descendants here, aren't you? Like with the Stimpsons. So that's kind of part of the story too. So she went to Clary Business College with my mom, and I think she met. The interesting thing about meeting Uncle Mike or Uncle Wendell was he was up here working the state docks, and she met him. She was working at either Jan's or at the Pontiac Motor Lodge, and she met him, and they fell in love, and that, I think that was the only boyfriend, girlfriend either one of them ever had, and they were always together. So even though she didn't have any children, again, she took care of a lot of people out in California. And she's very active in cooking, gardening, loved flowers. She introduced us kids here, like we were meat and potatoes, but Asian food, Mexican food. When she'd come to Mackinaw and we'd see her in the summer, you're going to have tacos tonight. You're going to, what? You know, I used to think Chinese food came out of a La Choy can. Not with Aunt Kay. She was an excellent cook. Right, Tom?
Yeah.
And she'd take care of, like, when Tom was sailing and Uncle Warren were sailing, where did they bunk up when they came into port? Aunt Kay's.
Yeah.
And a lot of other people did too. Okay. My wife's giving me, I gotta speed up. Okay, next one is Bert. Warren, he was known, or the Wrangler, he was known. Some of you guys might have known him, because he hung around town. He died in 2004, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Tom's father. He was raised, they moved into town when he was probably 12 or something, but he was born on the farm. He dropped out of school in 9th grade. He worked a year on the chief, and then he took off. And he somehow got to Florida, and he caught a boat. He caught a freighter, a steamer.
Tanker.
A tanker, thank you. I knew this sailor would know the right word. And he did a hitch, and he came back home, or came back into port, and he had a pile full of money. So he bought that brand new Harley Davidson. And he rode it all the way up to Mackinaw, and he was showing it off, and he was riding with Harry John Burroughs.
Yeah.
And he wrecked it. And he almost killed them both. And then he kind of wandered around, worked odd jobs, and then he got drafted. No, then he served. He went back into the Marines, because from 45 to 48, he worked for Keystone Tanker Corporation out of LA. And there was a couple of times he almost lost his life. He was involved in a fire where the ship caught on fire, and he jumped overboard, and the water had oil on it. It was all blaze, and there's newspaper articles of that. So he had a pretty exciting life. But even though he dropped out of school, if you knew Warren, and there's pictures of his around here at Darrow's, he was a self-taught naturalist. He was a great photographer. He knew his plants. He's got all kinds of pictures that there's some in the Michigan room. There's, like I say, there's some at Darrow's, there's some at Mama Mia's, and he could mat photos. He was an excellent photographer, and he knew all the plants, and he all self-taught. And he turned into a lighthouse guy too. He says, I've traveled the world, and I've seen lighthouses nobody else has ever saw, but I never took pictures of them. Then I had to take them all around the state of Michigan so you get a picture of all the lighthouses, you know. I mean, I didn't take them everywhere, but I took them some places. And then he said, this is the last thing about Warren, is he sailed the world, and he said there is no place better in this whole world than Mackinaw City, Michigan. And he says, and there's no better fish than a whitefish. And that's the way he felt. And he was the only one of the 7 that maintained a residence in Mackinaw City till he died. All the others had moved off. Okay, all right. How much time do I have?
Gotta do Bill.
Well, I know. How much time? Not much?
Enough time to do Bill.
Oh boy, Bill's the best of the 7. And well, he's got the best stories. So he's the youngest of 7, and he spent some time at Maple Ridge. He had rheumatic fever when he was a child, so he did not play sports. He was a team manager. And he was class president, and he went to Hillsdale College from 1950 to 1954. He got to Hillsdale College not because there was money in the family, but because Hattie Stimpson left him in his will. Him being the youngest, he spent a lot of time with Hattie, and she, Hattie's well known around here. Started the library, the women's club. Well, Hattie, that was her boy. Hattie never had any children, so Bill was her kind of adopted son, and she left money for him to go to Hillsdale, where he was like the team manager for the football team, the track team, the basketball team, and he also lived above the field house. That helped him cover his board. Then he came home and worked summers at Camp Algonquin and learned his canoeing skills and outdoor skills there. That was on Burt Lake. It's still there, I think. But anyway, so he ended up after college, he went into the Army. I talked about Korea, so I won't go into that. He didn't like Korea. He didn't like the Army. But then he came back and he started teaching school. That's what he went to college for. Pellston first, Elkona for 2 years, then Rogers City. And he said, I'm going to live at a place where I'm on the Great Lakes. At that time, you could get a teaching job if you were persistent. You know, it was he could pick, and he says, I'm going to live on the Great Lakes. And that's what he did. He lived at Rogers City. He ended up getting a master's from the University of Hawaii, and it's in Memories of Mackinaw, if you want to read it. And if you want to read the story on chapter 2 is the Stimpson's part in the Straits Transportation. It's a pretty good read from my point of view. I hope you'd all read it, and I'd love to talk to you more about that. But he did all the research, so all that's like fact. I mean, there were recordings of John Stimpson, who did recordings before he passed away, like photograph albums, and then we got him on tape now. It talks about the family history. Well, so Bill never married. He was the bachelor. Never had any children, but he had a ton of children because he was a coach and a teacher, and he coached wrestling from 1969 to early 82 when his heart started to fail him, and he took these kids to wrestling camps all over the country, including me and Tom. You know, when we were starting out. He went all over the place. Well, he's in the High School Athletic Association Hall of Fame for wrestling coach. He had great teams, but he had to give it up because of his poor health. This all relates to the rheumatic fever when he was a young kid. But so he loved canoe trips, and he did that. Well, here's the best one. In 1967, he did a trip with 3 other students, and they canoed in 2 canoes the entire length of the Mississippi River, from Lake Itasca all the way to New Orleans. They didn't go out into the ocean. Now, when the river got wide enough, what they did is they made the canoes into like a pontoon. They put a board, you can kind of see it up there in the picture. But you notice he started out, I said 3 other students. Now they started out with 4 of them, ended up with only 3 of them, because one kid dropped out. The 2 from Rogers City stayed with him. The one from Farmington left him. And he always liked to say that because he always thought that up north kids were the toughest kids ever. You gotta love that. But anyway, so he did that, and then he did, like I said, he took kids on trips all over the country, including me twice, once to Glacier, once all the way out to the West Coast. And then after he got sick, he went to Russia. He took a railroad across Siberia on a guided trip, but he kept trying to get away from the security because he wanted to talk to people. And they had agents, you know, this. And then later on, he went and saw the Great Wall of China and went to Mongolia. And then he said it wasn't so strict, the security wasn't as strict, and the Chinese students, the young kids, they wanted to talk to him in English. They wanted to work on their English. He loved that. So he did a lot of traveling, even when his health was bad. He was able to go on that. Most of these Barretts, Stimpsons are in the cemetery in Mackinaw, but Bill's is at the high school. When he died, they had his funeral in the gym, and they brought one of his canoes, and his plaque is right outside the gymnasium. All these ex-wrestlers came up. The gym was packed. So he didn't have any children, but he had lots of children. He was instrumental in both of our lives. He was the one that preserved all the documents and all the artifacts that went to Tom, that went out to the village, that now we can enjoy out at the village. He'd be so happy about that. Yeah. Anyway, so I think it's time to wrap it up. Yeah? Well, I probably don't have time to talk about the gypsy, but I can.
You got 5 extra minutes. I started it.
Well, I'll do the final.
There's Angie's.
So here's the point. The Stimpson family came to Mackinaw City as early pioneers in the late 1860s. The Barrett family, that's just 3 generations down. They hardly made a presence in Mackinaw City. Now there's nobody living in Mackinaw City of Stimpson ancestry. I live down by Douglas Lake. Tom lives in Rogers City. My cousin Forrest lives out on Charlie's old farm. There's just a couple other ancestors. And the last one to graduate from Mackinaw City was Bill in 1950. The last one to live in Mackinaw City was Warren, his dad, in 2004. Okay? But when you look at it, that's not uncommon in America. There's a lot of families like this. We move, we spread out. We don't stay where we were born. I bet lots of you guys can think that way. So, Charles Stimpson did an extraordinary thing. He built the Maple Ridge Farm out there on Stimpson Road from nothing. Poor soil, terrible, short growing season. And he made it work. He raised crops that he could sell the excess off to the trains or lamb to the Grand Hotel. Made money on wool. Cut the timber off first. He was very successful and did good things. But his descendants, his son was a civil engineer, South Carolina. Nothing wrong with that. His daughter was a housewife on Maple Ridge Farm, and then later moved into Mackinaw. Raised 7 children. Nothing wrong with that. The 7, I'll just go down. Forrest was an Air Force sergeant. Rogers City. Dairy farmer, Monroe Township. Auto worker, Emily City. That would be Jack. Secretary, state employee, Avon lady, Clawson, Michigan. That's my mom. She did what she could to take care of her kids. Housewife, Camarillo, California, very involved in civic activities. Sailor, Mackinaw City, sailed the world. Warren, made a life. School teacher, Rogers City. That's how it ended up. Very few descendants left, but I'm proud to say they were my family. So, do you have any questions?
We have a couple of questions
Uh-oh.
from Monica. Help me understand the line of inheritance for Maple Farm, for Maple Ridge.
Couldn't hear that. Could you repeat that?
Help me understand the inheritance from Maple Ridge Farm. Okay, well, Maple Ridge Farm starts with Charles and Ella. In 1882, they were married, and I think the house was built right then. And then he passed away in 1929. He had 2 children, Clarence and Ruth. Clarence moved off. Ruth had 7 children, all spent part of their lives on Maple Ridge Farm before it was sold to the Greevies, who are the only other owners of that land and have been very good stewards to that land, since the Greevies are great people. And anyway, so that's the lineage. Is that?
Yeah.
I think that's perfect.
Okay.
There was one other question about whether or not, or if you could talk about the family and how they were involved in a church or local politics.
Oh, well.
Could you repeat the question?
Okay, how the family was involved in church. Well, I'm not talking about these people tonight, but Grandma they were all members of the Church of the Straits, or back then there was a Presbyterian and a Methodist church, and the Stimpsons were Presbyterians. And so Grandma was an Eastern Star, my mother was an Eastern Star, Kay was an Eastern Star. They were all members of, later on, Church of the Straits. I think there's a pew that Uncle Bill bought and dedicated in the Church of the Straits now. But earlier, there was involvement in the first church services in Mackinaw City, and, you know, Ida, even though she never, that's going away, that gets too involved, so I'll just leave that.
In politics.
Oh,
Are there any other
politics.
questions from the audience?
Oh, yeah, questions from the audience. I'll leave that politics out.
Okay. I want to know which Stimpson it was that Bill, that kind of took Bill in.
Oh, good
Hattie,
question.
was it?
Hattie was married to the youngest of the 6, and she was married to John Stimpson, Hattie Richardson. She was an artist. You can see her artwork in the Stimpson house, and she taught him calligraphy. He did errands for Hattie.
Would she have been like a great aunt to him then?
We call her Aunt Hattie, but she was my grandmother's aunt. So yes,
Oh,
you're
okay.
right. She was, because she was an aunt to my grandma, but not that far apart in age, because John was the youngest, and Grandma's father was the oldest of the Stimpsons. But
Hattie-
there's a lot of
Hattie
good, there's a
threw me.
lot
I
of
was
good
like, I
Hattie
don't know who that
stories
one
too,
is.
but that's for another time, because Hattie was very refined. You know, like if you came out of the bathroom and you were still wiping your hands dry from the towel, now the Barretts were a lot rougher clay.
You're lucky me once,
So there you go. Any other questions? Yeah, Bill.
I suffered through oyster stew for Christmas Eve for every year of my life that my mother was alive. My family was all German, came over from Germany in the 1800s, settled in New York originally, but then went on into Iowa, Nebraska, and that area. Was that an ethnic thing, or was it an East Coast thing?
Well, I always assumed, I don't know, but I always assumed it was a New England thing, you know, those.
Okay.
Because that was how my mom told the story. Grandpa always had to get oysters for Christmas Eve dinner.
So they probably would have picked it
They
up in New
shipped
York.
them in. They had them shipped in. I don't know how they were shipped in, through the A&P store or what, but
Yeah.
I always thought it was a Puritan thing.
One more virtual question.
Okay.
What is the relationship to the old Stimpson house / hotel on Central Avenue?
Okay, that was known as the Stimpson house, and that was built by George. That's what, at the very beginning of the talk, I talked about how George's house, because people would get off the steamers when they were loading the wood on the steamers, or if it was rough and there was no place to stay. In those real early days, there was nothing here but Native Americans. I mean, the fort was abandoned. So they'd come down to where they lived, and Elvira would cook them a meal, and then that turned into an enterprise. I mean, they turned their house into the Stimpson house, which it used to be easy to say it was where Shirt Tails is now, but Shirt Tails isn't there anymore. So it's like the popcorn factory, and it's kind of like right across the street from the Great Buffalo Trading Post, and it's that one, and there's just parts of it.
There's no more porch.
There's no more porch. It had a big porch, but that was the Stimpson house, and we call this the Stimpson homestead, and I like to refer to it as Maple Ridge Farm, because that's what Grandpa Stimpson called it. That's what it was. He planted those maple trees that, Greg, you used to tap for maple syrup all those years. We got pictures of those when they were as small as the trees out on the entryway to the village, you know? So, anybody else?
Before
Well-
you give claps for this, hey Tom, will you stand up a second?
Yeah, I didn't.
Get next to him.
I'm telling you, I couldn't have done it without Tom. He didn't like to talk, but like, he helped me get around. He made the cookies.
Tom made the
So
cookies.
have some cookies. He was a lifetime cook steward on the ocean growing boats, and no better cook.
So he gets to do, there's 6 different ones. Can you tell us the 6 different ones?
Oatmeal peanut butter, zucchini, chocolate chip, chocolate chip, and sugar cookies.
Or those Italian.
And the Italian pizza cookies, I guess. They're like a waffle cookie.
Well, I would love you all to come and partake of the cookie, talk with them. I do believe there's some pictures to look at too, and some photo
And
albums.
anybody want to hear about the gypsy?
Oh, we love gypsies.
Well, no, the gypsy,
Vehicle.
the
Oh,
gypsy
I
vehicle,
know.
that picture.
Go back some more.
I don't, I mean, I can do that
We're okay.
if we're done with the,
Well, thank you so much for
but the
coming,
gypsy's
guys.
cool thing and,
Go ahead.
no.
Go ahead. I want to hear about the gypsies.
I want to hear about the gypsy.
I do.
Doesn't have the picture up, yeah.
Well, can you put that up, hon? No?
Oh, I had it.
Well, she took herself
Yeah, if you got a
off.
minute, I won't take too long, but that's a pretty good, yeah.
Need me to come back?
Dennis, can you tell me what year the barn burned at the hill?
You know, I'm glad you asked that. Do you mean the cow barn? About 1939. And
I was in Bert Bear's
barber shop?
barber shop getting a haircut when
With-
that was burning.
Oh, my God.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
Because, you know, until I was
would see the smoke.
researching that,
I could see the smoke and dirt ran out, and he had an assistant.
There it is.
He finished my hair.
so you got memories of Bert.
Oh, yeah. I
You wanna
went to
share-
school with Billy.
Okay.
Oh.
You want
He
to
graduated here before I did.
share some memories with Bert about Bert?
Oh, he was
The thing
so-
I always heard from the old timers is he was a hell of a guy, but he couldn't cut hair.
He didn't cut it like this.
He cut my hair once because my mom wanted him to when I was a little kid, and he bore down so he was retired from barbering and he shouldn't have been doing it, but
No.
he had an electric razor and he bore down so hard on the back of my head that I can remember I mean, it sticks in my memory. But I know he always liked the Tigers, the Tiger fans. That was,
Oh, that's all you heard about.
and yeah, we could go on and on.
Apartment right next to the bar.
Yeah.
Another thing, I was very good friends with Bill
Hmm.
until he got through college and everything. And we used to play cards at the old house down on Jamie Street.
On Sinclair.
Yeah, or Sinclair.
Yeah.
And we played all night. He played classical, all night classical music.
Yeah, that sounds.
I loved his old album.
Yeah.
And I got his albums.
But you know what? When I was growing up and we'd go out to Rogers City, you know, when he was a wrestling coach, his house was on the beach, and he had a wrestling room in his house,
Yeah,
and he had a sauna, and kids would come out there to swim, canoe, wrestle, cook marshmallows, listen to music, talk politics.
Get tied up.
Get tired.
Yeah.
He
He
was,
could wrestle,
okay, here's the gypsy, okay? And there's a display about this. So, in 1928, Clarence, the son of Charles, that's Charles on the right, that's Clarence on the left. You notice how he's not showing his left arm? It's missing.
He doesn't have one.
He doesn't have it. But in the early days when he's a wrestler and a football player, he has one. And anyway, and the guy in the middle is Frank Potter. Frank Potter from Potter Road. So
Cousin of Harry
so
Potter.
Clarence buys this by 28, you know, that's 10 years after the war, or he got out of the war, and he's probably a successful civil engineer, and he buys this 28 Chevy flatbed pickup truck, and he sends it to a place somewhere Midland Bay City to put a camper on it, and they call it the Gypsy. That had bunks in it, it had an ice box in it, it had oil lamps on it, and it had a wicker chair for a steering wheel, and it had turn signals that you manually operate. So Grandpa's like, this is the year before Grandpa died. He died in 29, and in October they took off for California in that vehicle, the three of them, and they left Mackinaw, went all the way out to Southern California because Frank Potter had a daughter out there, and Charles had a son, George a brother out there who was a veterinarian out there. That would be this guy, and They went out there and they stayed the winter in Southern California. Then they came back with that vehicle and got back in the spring. Grandpa wasn't, I think he died in June. Anyway, that car went into a garage at the end of Stimpson Road. Who was the guy? Who Bill bought it from? Anyway, my Uncle Bill bought it, and it was a wreck. I mean, it wasn't a wreck, but it had just sat in the shed for years. And so he actually offered it to me. He says, I'd like you to take the Gypsy. And I says, Bill, I don't have the money, I don't have a place to put it, and I don't have the knowledge to restore it. I says, you sell it. And he did, he sold it to, from the lamplighter. Terry Day, yeah, well,
Bud Dexel.
Bud Dexel, thank you, Bill. Bud Dexel, buddy, owned like a lot of antique cars, and he had a dealership downstate, and he restored that in a matter of months, and he brought it up, and there it is with my Uncle Bill and my Uncle Warren, his dad, in 1997, and we got to ride in it. And Tom and I are now looking for it, because we'd like to buy it, and we'd like to donate it to the village. But we can't find it. So if you guys, and Terry Davis has been hunting it on Facebook, and I got a tip at the Historical Society show about it, that it might be in this museum down by Steckerville, or down in Macomb County. I looked through their webpage, I didn't see any. I took a virtual tour of it, I didn't see anything. But if I ever get down to the Detroit area, I will
I think
seek
we
it
need a
out.
road trip, don't you think?
Yeah, but anyway, that's the story of the Gypsy. Can you imagine doing that on wooden spoke tires? And I guess, and we have diary entries of it was a very enjoyable time. An 80-year-old guy doing that. And I mean, like, driving through the desert. And so they were wanderers too. And
Where were the wife and children of those three men that just?
well, they left. I don't know about
That's why they got to go.
Ruth. I don't know about Frank, except he had a daughter out there. That's one of the reasons they went to visit. Clarence had no children. He wasn't even married yet at that time.
Oh.
But he never did have. I don't think he married till 34.
Oh.
And then Grandpa Charles, that's his son. His wife had already passed away. She preceded. She died before my mom was born. She died in 1918. And then he's with his son, and his Ruth is watching the farm where he was still living. You know, the Maple Ridge Farm. So.
Well, there you have it. Give them a
My pleasure.
Come up and try one of these